Welcome to the Consultant's Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMahon & Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultant's Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Hello, everybody. This is a wonderful day for us. We're getting to do our advisory board, taking on issues, sharing. I don't want to say best practices. Can I just say practices? Stuff that happens. We hope everybody gets value out of this, and I know you will. But first, let me let everybody kind of just reintroduce to the thousands of people who are going to see this that so you remember who they are. So I'm going to start with Michael Turner.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Turner. I manage professional services for Upland Software, and I'm presently located in.
And we're jealous just on that, literally where you get to leave. Sarah?
Hi, Sarah Lyons. I run the professional services team at Rountable, and I'm in Chicago.
And no one
is jealous of that.
Brian Freeman.
Hey everybody, I'm Brian Freeman. I lead the professional services team at Zywave, and I am located out of Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay, we have some jealousy. Andrew.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Andrew Cappiello. I'm the Director of Professional Services at Captivate IQ, and I'm located in Long Island, New York.
Nothing. No, get a coffee and come on back. Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Vasquez, Director of Services, as well as I lead an enterprise support team, and I'm at Avanti. I'm located here in the San Francisco Bay Area.
That's not. Now, for a minute, I thought you were going to run an NGO. Just for a second. Anthony.
Yep, Anthony Paluska. For the purposes of this, I'm a partner at McMahon & Ransford, and I'm located in Houston, Texas.
I don't know what other purposes you have, but we'll
point back. There's all sorts of different. I wear a bunch of different hats.
We'll get right back to that later and talk about those daughters of yours. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is the inevitable conflict that all of our people deal with, and ourselves as leaders, and then different manifestations, different ways to deal with it, different tools, techniques you might use, and we're all over the board in our experiences. We're all over the board in our the type of companies we work with. So this will be really fun. So the first question is, I want to take the tough one first. Clients. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about conflict with clients. Now, leave yourself out and just talk about your people and no client names, no current projects. All right. So first up, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about things you've seen of conflict between, normal conflicts your people have with your clients.
Yeah, I think for most of the people on this call, familiarity with this one would be scope creep. When you go through a design process with a customer, you have a requirements document that's filled out, agreed upon, et cetera. And then somewhere downstream, either through miscommunication or through, the customer realizing that maybe we didn't grab everything they wanted to, it creates this conflict of, what you guys are delivering is not exactly what we're requiring here. And so I feel like that's a pretty common one in the professional services space. And it can be on the smaller end of the spectrum where it's one or two little pieces, or it can be on the larger end of the spectrum where it's, hey, you're missing a large chunk of what we were expecting out of this project. So I would say that's a fairly common one I've seen.
So, Brian, what is that every time, all the time?
I mean, it certainly happens a lot, right? But whether it's scope, expectations on what your solution can do and should do, different experiences your customers have had with other providers and similar solutions, and they're comparing what you can do to what others do, and thinking that there should be equivalence to that. And so it happens more than any of us on this call would like to see, but it certainly doesn't happen all the time. But there's a lot of ways to navigate it, right? Get ahead of it, so that the more you can kind of showcase what you're creating on their behalf early on to get that feedback, so you have time to do something about it if you are misaligned. Always working with your partners in sales to showcase things that come up during your projects so that they're headed off in the sales cycle as much as one can. And I'm sure a number of other techniques, but bad news doesn't get good with age, and nor do surprises. So the more you can identify that stuff up front, the better off everybody is, because it gives you time to deal with it and do something about it.
Yeah, you mentioned two things that I think are great. One is we can avoid some of this by doing better in the beginning, right? No matter where we started, I always think, are we replanning this? Are we re-educating? But the other thing is you can sometimes, as you said, you can sometimes have clients that already have a preconceived notion about how it's going to work. And that could be they've had bad experiences or whatever. Sarah, tell us, when I know you have lots of techniques and I know your clients love you. So what are some things we do when they're just plain wrong? I mean, there's a misconception.
I think some of it, and someone might have mentioned it, doing everything you can to set the right expectation at the beginning to avoid the conflict. Maybe you can. And what I have seen work is, so the company I work with, Reltio, we're a master data management company. We do a lot of work around unifying profiles in customer data. So there's a lot of work around match rules. Customers tend to think they want certain profiles to merge in a certain way, and it's totally normal not to understand what all those impacts are. So instead of just blindly saying, okay, that's what you want, that's what we'll configure. Think about, okay, I understand that might be what you think is going to happen, but here's what we've actually seen happen when we take that approach. And pull from our experience. You and I have talked about storytelling, share a story on how one time a customer did take that approach and it did not yield the results that they wanted. I think if you have that conversation up front, you have a better chance of just avoiding the conflict altogether. If you still are not able to, do that and the conflict still arises, documentation can be everyone's best friend too, and go back. And it's a fine line when you get in that situation too, because you can't say, have the I told you so attitude, but you can go back and say, well, we did talk about this, and, this is the type of scenario we were referring to. And, you've got valid proof right there as to why you need to pivot and change course. And I did say it's a fine line, because the other thing you need to keep in mind while you're having these conversations is empathy. When you're talking with a customer, you always need to remember to empathize with them, no matter what. If you're wrong, they're wrong, no matter what, they are upset. So you need to understand that and show them that you understand that. And that can de-escalate conflict a lot.
Yeah. I mean, actually caring about them and having that come across. Yeah, very good. So that was great. Mike Turner, I'm going to ask you if there's another type of conflict that we see with clients that might be on your mind.
Well, I think it's similar to the concept of scope creep, which is, hey, we sold you something and you didn't understand that what we sold you was completely not what you wanted. That could be the software itself. That could be the service itself. I've definitely come across in my career a number of times when an assumption was made that some functionality or capability was there that just doesn't exist. It's magic. This leads to massive problems potentially in your implementation cycle that can only bleed over into the customer success relationship that the company needs to have at a later date.
And do you have a thought on what do we do when we wake up and you bought the wrong product?
Well, I've handled it well.
I don't think it's give them their
not
money
well.
back. I don't think we start with that.
No, we certainly don't, because you've signed a contract and unfortunately you're legally obligated to pay us. But I have had to have conversations in the past, really difficult conversations. First off, I want to echo what Sarah said a few minutes ago, which was the empathy in this situation is a big one. But literally having to go back to the sales cycle, bring up the documentation, walk through the documentation and show someone where the misunderstanding occurred, and react to that. Like, hey, we wrote this sentence in here. It was one sentence amongst 500 pages. You glommed onto that. You thought it meant something different than what we intended it for to mean. We are very, very sorry about that. In some cases, I've run into situations where it is technology that no one has. I want to magically be able to track my marketing content from past to past from everyone who's ever seen it. Well, if we could do that, I wouldn't be selling you the software right now because I would be a billionaire. Right. Right. But regardless, the point being, having a very upfront and very fast conversation around the problems that the customer sees and the mitigation strategies that we can make to try to make the situation better. But with that said, we're talking about scenarios where it's not going to be completely fixable. And so what you have to do is do your best to salvage a relationship on the remaining value that you provide the customer.
And that's very hard. So let's take, Anthony, that scenario where we're using empathy and your clients just found themselves in a situation where they didn't intend to be there, and we have a contract, right? And I think that's not all that common, but it's not all that uncommon either.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably more common than we'd all like it to be, and I think part of that conflict management begins with at all levels of the group, building the relationship across the client organization, not just with our check writer and our key sponsor, but also making sure that our team has the idea of making sure that they can build the right relationships across the team and understanding who owns those relationships, who's responsible for understanding and updating what's happening, and having the internal meetings so that we're getting feedback along the way to make sure that we understand across all facets of the business, right, what is actually believed to be being done by the product and by our team versus what we're actually going to be able to accomplish. And then using that information and insights and the relationships that we try to build to continue to sell to the client throughout the entire process. I was talking to somebody, actually a group of MBAs the other day, and they said, what's the most surprising thing about professional services or consulting that we wouldn't expect if we shifted into this career? And it was, well, it's not about solving the problem so much, is most of our role is continuing to sell and do the change management to get a client to go through some sort of journey, because no matter how they started, it's now our responsibility as the delivery organization to make sure that they get their response or get there effectively. And I think if we all have that attitude, right, and as leaders, we empower our teams to view our role in that way, rather than just the experts that come in and execute on the contract, but also continue that sales process. I think that helps that particular situation that Mike just brought up.
Super.
I would say, one of the biggest things is we all want our customers to be successful, right? It's not just about us being successful, but building that partnership with the customer and making sure they're successful. And when we run into these issues and problems, how do we resolve them? Because it is a conflict, but starting with the empathy and trying to understand where did we go wrong and how do we fix that? Sometimes things can be fixed easily. Maybe it's just a change order. Maybe it's just understanding, and maybe it's education on the customer side. It could be any number of things, but we got to start with understanding and empathy, because things can easily spiral out of control with more frustration from the customer's point of view.
Yeah, and I think the two issues we brought up so far, one of the most interesting things, if we're doing this well, it doesn't become y'all's problem. We're able to deal with this at the level of the professional dealing with the client, right? we've got to be able to do that. But I want to move. Anybody else on client before we move on to some? I don't know if it's a less dangerous space or more dangerous space. We'll move there anyway. So, Sarah, what do you think about conflict with the rest of the organization? Where does it occur? Why does it occur? Is it because they don't know what we do? No. Or they don't care what we do? No, it can't be.
No, not at all. I think part of it might be because we do so many different things and we get involved and we have so many different kinds of conversations with the customer that maybe not everyone understands like how embedded we can become. They might not fully understand everything professional services does. I will say the company I work at now, we actually have very good open communication. And I think it's a very solid use case on how that can help mitigate internal conflict. When we don't do it for every account, but when we have some very large strategic accounts, we do have like a SWAT team of all cross-functional teams at our organization. And we have a regular cadence just to keep everyone informed on everything that's going on in the account. You know, during an engagement, professional services might have the most updates, but we also hear from the customer success organization, from the product management organization, because everyone here probably knows that even if there is a PS engagement, there's certain resources at a customer that have their, tight connections within your organization that might not be in PS. And they have one-off conversations that nobody, or I'll say not everybody, is aware of. And sometimes that's the root of conflict. Where
they call around the PS organization to provide feedback on them. Is feedback an okay thing, or to complain about them? I didn't get my way, I'm going to call.
Exactly. And I think that's fine. It's going to happen. You just need to be realistic about it and keep everyone on the account team updated. So, I mean, it seems like a very simple foundational approach, but that has really helped minimize conflict internally at our organization, at least.
Yeah, and when we're keeping each other apprised, or you're going in and out of an account, right? Same problem. The efficient communication is as important as communicating, right? Because you can be overwhelmed with data information that's not helpful for me, and therefore I'll ignore it. And I say, so, Brian, do you want to talk about any time in your vast historical space of the 800 years you've done this, back when we got out of the caves, typical conflicts that recur with other organizations as we're trying to bring our clients to success?
Yeah, I mean, I think services or delivery is always, we're always challenged in terms of different priorities across the organization, right? So whether it's R&D, whether it's sales, whether it's customer success, whether it's support, what have you, we all have different priorities. We're all measured differently in terms of our success. And so I think that's a natural source of conflict internally in most SaaS organizations. I think to Sarah's point, one key is talking to one another, making sure we all know what our priorities are. And that opens the door to working things out, right? The other thing I've found effective is highlighting how professional services or delivery is contributing to key customer account wins, to company performance. If PS is over delivering in a certain metric, highlighting that in a broad sense to bring visibility to the impact that that part of the organization has on the overall company. Otherwise, because we do so many different things, people tend to get a very pigeonholed perspective of what we do based on their experience, and they probably don't understand the larger picture, the larger impact to customer retention that we have, to revenue that we have, to even add on and upsell and cross-sell, et cetera, et cetera. And so the more we can do as PS organizations to highlight those wins, I think we help ourselves out, and even getting our executive teams to help carry those stories forward only broadens their perspective of the value that we bring to the table.
Yeah, I think being better at educating our organization may be one of the most important things we should in the cycle we're in right now as PS leaders fix, because they it's not like they're uninterested, they're just uninterested. No, I mean it's just so different for them. So anybody want to provide anything else about internal conflict before we get to something juicy like our own people? Yes, Mike.
Sure. So, there are oftentimes, that, depending on the organization you're with, and sales has made the sale and they throw it over the fence at you and you're sent off running. That alignment with the customer becomes even more important on that first kickoff call with the customer, because what may have been sold from a customer, from a sales point of view, they didn't capture all the details and pass those things across. And you may be walking in with some information, but not enough. And that can lead to some confusion that, leads to other complications farther down the road. So when we talk about internal conflicts and within organizations, trying to get all that information, it may be not like a conflict of an argument or a fight with sales teams or other groups. It's that lack of understanding of process or gathering all the right information, is maybe there are questions and things that they didn't have an SE involved who had enough technical information to provide during that sales cycle. So it's not that conflict is always a good or bad thing of argumenting or fighting. There's just conflicts within the organization to gather the right information, even from a process. And we run into internal conflicts with ourselves.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask Mike Turner in a second to respond to what he was thinking. But we always say you have, and I'd like y'all's opinion, you have three different voices. One, how we talk internally, PS, how we talk to our organization, which are our clients, and how do we talk to our clients. And that's a tough thing. We had someone join an internal meeting recently who had come from corporate world. And at the end, they said, I've never been in a meeting where everybody's so aggressive and so blunt and so honest with each other. Well, that's because we're not talking to the non-PS people, right? We have to talk to them differently. So anyway, Mike Turner, what were you going to say?
Increasingly, we're seeing customer success as a spectrum, right? Like, so you've got I'm just an advocate for the customer versus I've got a huge bag of business I got to sell. And my organization has moved very into almost account management, and with a very large expectation, not only on churn, but on uplift on the present customer base. This comes directly in conflict with the public expectation that we hit a margin and a certain amount of money in professional services that we report out to Wall Street on a quarterly basis. And so what you end up with is a direct conflict between the two goals. I empathize a lot with my CS peers who are like, I have a book of business I have to hit. I have a quota. I need to get my goals met. I don't get incentivized anywhere near as much for selling your services, and actually would prefer to give your services away to get my book of business dealt with. So this is a completely different type of internal conflict than the ones that have been mentioned prior to this, which is this is almost a purposely set up strategic conflict within the organization. And what I've had to learn to do is work very closely with my CS peers to talk to them about the value to them and the consequences to not selling our business, so that they feel a certain sense of obligation, despite the fact that their goals don't align with mine at all, that they need to take care of their PS peers, or else they will not have this team of people to help them continue to succeed. So what we can't have under these circumstances is just straight up conflict. Like, I hate you, you hate me, right? Instead, what we have to do is figure out a way to be a bit of the bedrock of their business and help them achieve the goals they need to achieve, so that they don't end up leaving us behind, because the pressure on them is incredibly intense. So,
and I think they're becoming more and more of a sales asset. I mean, no offense.
It is definitely happening this way.
It's the dirty little secret nobody wants to talk about. But also,
exactly.
Mike, you brought up, and this is just our reality, and I think we're good enough to do it. Is when the client problems happen, when the internal, it is on us to be the educator of this. And just to highlight great things you've done, Michael, you've done a really great job of educating mathematically the people you work around, and we're always impressed.
Whenever you live a numbers world like I do, you just constantly bring numbers to the table and juggle them like they're balls, right?
and by the way, Brian and I were working on this recently. He had mentioned something. I said, I think we have data on that, right? So one of the things we keep an awful lot of data. So anybody who says, hey, do you have anything on this particular topic? Let us know. We'll be glad to provide it. So now, inside our own organizations, and I'm going to share one that I hear a lot that you might all say yes or no to. The one I hear a lot is we're having a generational conflict between people who came in 5, 6, 7 years ago and people who come in now, and their point of view of work and what's good enough and what I want out of my day. And okay, so there's one thing of managing a different generation. I'm on the conflict that I'll hear from people in their 30s and in their early 40s that say, I just don't want to work with them. Right? And then on the other side, you hear, I don't know, I heard this recently. I don't know why everybody's always so upset, man. Wow. So run with that if you want, anyone. And if not, let's take some other things that happen internally. And if you don't,
I was going to say, Dean, I don't hear that specifically come up in the sense of it's a generational thing. Being a company that we've acquired other companies, it becomes multiple companies and the cultures of these different companies trying to integrate and building a new culture together is where I see more of those conflicts, not a generational thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is something you can do when you have all these different cultures?
I think it's really starting to define, what is it that if we work with the individuals or look at these different groups that have come together, how do we start building them into a cohesive team? And when we start, there could be literally a group of people, and you call them a team, but they're a group of people. They all function independently. They don't actually work together. When we start looking at how do you work together, it starts becoming how do we define goals that they can all work towards, but also defining their career paths. If we start looking at their career paths and looking at how they can grow, they then start looking at growing together as a group as opposed to individually looking at how they grow.
I always think that if we make our culture clear, you have the right to opt in or out. But if we're not making it clear and you're just living through our culture and we're not clear about why we, good or bad, why we believe these things and why that's our bedrock, then you can say, hey, I don't like any of that. Or, yeah, that I'll try it. Or it's great. Yeah. Right. All right. Other internal things.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I'm glad you called it out as culture, because I thought of both the example Dean gave and then the example you gave in the same category as you've just hired somebody new into the team that came from a competitor, and naturally they've come from a different culture in that. And I think the conflict really arises when there's the disconnect between your expectations as a team leader or a project leader or whatever, assigning somebody else an assignment or an activity of that. And I think too often we all get in the habit of assuming away what our expectations are clearly understood. And so I think the biggest tip or tactic I'd give is, right, let's make sure that we are very explicit, especially when somebody comes from a different generation, a different organization, a different culture, and setting the expectations for what needs to be done, how we would expect it to be done. And that doesn't mean our way is the right way and the only way to do that, but we need to open up that conversation so that we can understand where there's points of disconnect, so that in 3 weeks when something's expected to be done and it's done differently than we thought, or on a different pace or on a different thing like that, it's not a surprise and a conflict at that point. We can resolve that on the front end and come up with the best path forward to getting to the outcome that we need to get to. And so I think it comes back a lot to expectations management on the front end when we first start working with somebody, or you're assigned to a new project team.
Sarah, you were going to say something?
Just a couple of things kind of building on what Anthony said. I worked for a couple of different companies that have, they have a set of values that they share with every employee in the organization, and they even revisit them every several years. And I mean, that's a very easy way. If there's a conflict within the organization about, if this is the right expectation or not, you can point back to those core values of the company. And it's, it's pretty black and white. And then you actually just reminded me, Anthony, like we actually have it built into our methodology that whenever we start a new project, we have a conversation about ways of working, and expectations are part of that conversation. And sometimes it's a 10, 15-minute conversation, and it can be things as simple as, these are the core working hours. We have people in 10 different time zones. We're going to schedule meetings in PST time zones. And, these are the times everyone is going to be available. Just really simple things like that. Again, going back to setting the expectations at the beginning can just alleviate a lot of that conflict later.
And the repetitive nature of it, right? If you've heard that. Brian, were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, a repetitive nature is key, right? It's not just a one-time conversation around setting expectations, because different examples of expectations come up as you deliver customer engagements, et cetera. The other thing I was going to just mention is think about new hires, think about acquisitions. Everybody does something good, right? If you're acquiring a company or hiring a new person, they have some strength, and that's why you're acquiring them or hiring them. So being able to take an idea that they have or a way of doing things that they have and adopting that brings them into the fold immediately, right? It gives them traction. It gets them to buy in to your culture because you're listening to their ideas, their way of doing things, and you're acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that you brought them into the organization for a reason. And like we did one acquisition, and I still remember this day, one of the people we brought in said, we have a culture of running to the pain, right? When something's going wrong with a customer, we don't run away from it, we run to it. We acknowledge it, we engage the customer immediately in a conversation to fix it. And that was one of our acquisitions, and I remember it like it was yesterday when they told us that. And I was like, that's powerful. And so where possible, we've tried to adopt that in our broader organization thanks to what they brought to the table.
Yeah, that's great because, our culture can evolve and can improve. We just need to be clear about it. And I love that we've talked about expectations because I think that works in all our lives and everything, in my grandchildren and, hey, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Anybody else want to talk about that before we get to conflicts within a team, a delivery team?
Well, quick question for you. Do you want an answer to your original question, your generational question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a team. We hired a new person into the team who's very young. They are gender non-binary and had to work very closely with an ex-military veteran who is within 5 years of retirement. And
Sounds
it
different.
led, yeah,
Sounds
yeah,
different.
To make matters just a little bit more difficult, one was from the West Coast. I think you probably can pick which one, and one was from New Hampshire, which is the live free or die state, right? And it led to almost immediate conflict. And what we had to do to handle that conflict was to get the two of them to have conversations with each other and go so far as to prompt the conversation. These are the questions we want you to ask each other, and we literally need you to come back with answers about the other person, almost like an interview. And it completely broke down the misunderstandings that they were having. One person believed that the lack of response from another was disrespectful and wasn't providing them with what they needed. The other didn't realize that the other person needed that information at all. And it really allowed the two of them to see each other as human beings, as opposed to, this is just a young person, this is just an old person, and we don't get along. And it was an extremely interesting occasion in my career because it was one of those that I never expected to have to deal with. And yet, here we are.
There you were. So
yes.
I like, Mike, what you did was what Brian just said is you ran to the pain.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we kind of had to.
I think way too often I will let things go by. They'll work it out. Or, I got more important problems. Well, conflict in your organization, in your team and everything, that's a pretty important thing to get, so that
Yeah.
just from a personal point of view, so I'm not spending all my time on it, right?
And years later, they're both still working very effectively, and even one of them's even been promoted since this incident happened, and could very easily get promoted again. And so, like, we worked it out. That's the key. Is we worked it out. We figured out a way to get past it, and I learned a valuable lesson about interpersonal conflict, which I think is part of where you're actually taking our conversation next. So I thought it might be a good prelude to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have these teams that work under pressure together, and they don't always get to work with the same teams, and they come together and they have backgrounds, and some people have control issues, some people have determinate. We all come with our stuff. But to Brian's point, that we all have value, and we need to discover that value, but we need to find a way. So Mike Turner provided us one example. Andrew, do you have another maybe example from the University of Oklahoma where you had you have to know Andrew to know the joke. So anyway, just conflict within the team.
Yeah, so I've been at Captivate IQ just about a year now, and there's a little bit of, I'll touch on kind of the last question a little bit. There's a little bit of this old guard, new guard mentality. The company is very young. There's a lot of the original people here, including the founders, and sometimes with that, and we've hired in industry experts. We've also hired in just domain experts for professional services, CX, et cetera, product. And so sometimes what that leads to is the push and pull of limiting beliefs and then non-limiting beliefs, where you have this new guard come in and say, well, we should be able to do that in the product or in the process because I've seen it done before. And then you have potentially some of the old guard or the industry experts who say, no, it's always been done this way, and this is the way we have to do it. And for whatever reason, it has to be bespoke or it can't be done. And so that's one of the conflicts I navigate on pretty much a daily basis, where it's not so much interpersonal and they don't like each other, they can't work it out, but you have kind of these two extremes of like, that'll never work, and like, no, it has to work. You have the dreamers and the realists, essentially. And so I find myself playing mediator a lot on that, where I'm like, I see both sides of that, and try to get those people to like talk it out, hash it out. And neither, a lot of times what they find is like neither one of them are wrong. It's just the perspective or the background that they have is either putting those blinders on them. So I find that conflict a lot of fun to resolve. That's probably one of the more fun ones we'll talk about from the interpersonal team here. But for me, it's become the balance of like, how do we grow and scale as a business and as a startup, and using the people who have come here from publicly traded companies and companies who are doing it well and successfully, who have grown and scaled and seen it. And I'm on that side of the camp. I'm not the industry expert, but I have to really make sure to balance, like, what are the industry experts? What are the signals that they're telling us that really need to be looking out for, so we're not making a call just because that's the way somebody else has seen it done at another business and it worked well.
Yeah. No, that's very good. That's very good. Anyone else on inner team problems or opportunities?
As far as, going back to the, what Andrew's dealing with, I think a lot of this is about rethinking how you do things and being willing to try new things and looking at what works and doesn't work. If we're always trying to do the same thing over and over, you're never advancing. So if we're always kind of looking at what's working, what's not working, and how do we improve, that kind of helps build some of that culture, and those ideas of rethinking about what you're doing and not doing.
It's always interesting to me the people who will buy into our cultures that way, PS, and the people who hate that, right?
Yeah.
It was successful. Well, let's look why it was successful. Could we save 2 hours? Oh my God, But yeah, continual improvement is just kind of the best part of us, our nature. Mike, you were going, Monsieur Denner, you were going to say something?
Monsieur. So I'm a big fan of Brene Brown and Adam Grant. I think we've had these conversations, Dean, you and I personally, in the past.
But it was late in the bottle of wine. It was late.
Yeah. Quite a few bottles of wine, if I remember correctly. But one of the things that I really like to acknowledge with a team is that Andrew, when you're under the situation that you're talking about, where you have old guard, new guard, or a way that we've tried this, we can't do it, or it's not a PC anymore to call things a sacred cow, but like things that you can't touch, this can't be touched. It is always driven from a position of fear. So the key is to figure out and to get people to articulate, why are you afraid of revisiting this topic or changing the way you view it, or that piece of information that we just can't change? And once you get to that root cause and you get a group of people in a room having that conversation and being vulnerable with each other, inevitably those barriers fall down and we can at least make some progress. Maybe not the ultimate progress, but some progress, and start the ball rolling in the right direction.
That was great. Anthony, you want to add anything? And then I'm going to have some people tell us some final thoughts.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add that we haven't talked too much about team conflict, and I'll use an example of a client we were just talking to recently, and because it's indicative of a bigger problem here, the way that they were structured is they have all of their consultants that roll up and report up to some managers that are their leader in, I think they write in their performance management system and everything, and they give them annual performance reviews and they gather all this feedback. But all of those individuals are never working directly for those leaders. They're working for project leaders that exist in a different organization. And on a team, there grows this conflict all the time when there's not a project review kind of mechanism for providing just-in-time feedback from the person that's experiencing something that requires feedback and giving it to them in the moment of that. And so what happens inevitably in a situation like that is we have all the feedback get summarized and reported out at the end of the year by somebody that wasn't directly involved, and people put their guards up and they're very defensive about it because they don't know the specifics of the situation or it was too long ago and they're not. And so putting in place the right constructive feedback mechanisms in real time and setting up the culture of doing something like that, not so much about expectations, but it does do wonders for helping to head off conflict before something festers within a team that others may not even be aware of.
All right, you guys have been, as always, better than ever expected. Except for Anthony, of course, but that's a different topic.
Yeah.
Brian, give us a takeaway you'd like us to remember on conflict, and it can be don't have it.
If it was only that easy, right? I would just say assume positive intent in the conflict you're dealing with. Everyone's just assume they're coming out from a good place. You're just in different places, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a corporate change we need to make in the U.S. is always assume positive intent. Sarah?
I second that. And one that I have been really reminding myself of is show some grace. I think everything we've talked about here, we are entering an age of kind of a different kind of conflict. I'm seeing at our organization where AI is becoming a factor. And we're asking people to, incorporate AI into their daily tasks and, go off and build some AI agents to make your job easier. And nobody knows how to do this. It's all new. People are like, I'll try it. And you might have conflicts over the best way to do things. And we don't have any data to show one way is better than the other. So like I said, it's kind of a new age. I've told our teams many, many times, we have to be fluid. We have to listen to each other and give each other some grace while we're all learning.
Yeah. Excellent. Andrew? Any goodbye thoughts?
Yeah, plus one to Brian and Sarah's thoughts. But I think it's okay to spend time in what I would call educator mode, right? If you need to educate varying parts of your business, spend the time there. Don't just answer the Slack message or the email. Pick up the phone and call the person and, hey, here's why you can or can't have this thing. And here's how we look at it from the professional services lens. I find that spending a lot of time in that educator mode and spending an extra 10, 15 minutes to have that conversation resolves the conflict down the road, right? At least there's that mutual understanding. So I would advise to spend more time in educator mode than you think might be necessary.
And that may be one of the most important things a PS leader does, up and down, educator mode. Yeah, I agree. Michael V.
Yeah, I would say conflict's actually good. Conflict's healthy. It shows you where things are working and where things are not working.
Don't go to Michael's house on the weekend.
I didn't say we want conflict all the time. I'm just saying it's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not. And that's a really good point.
And coming to my house, yeah, no, we're not going to have conflicts. It'll all be good.
Okay. But it's true that conflict can find the problems. How do you know you need grease between two mechanical movements, right? Michael Turner.
I work really hard with my team to kick off every project in two ways: to very, very clearly outline everything you're going to do and exactly what it's going to look like, and also to take a position of partnership as opposed to a position of order takers. Because what I have found is that the lack of those two pieces of information will almost always lead to conflict. And so while some might believe conflict's a good thing, I'm working to avoid it. And this is, in my opinion, is the way you really, really, really nail it down. And worst case scenario, you get to conflict faster. You get to conflict before things have escalated beyond your ability to handle.
Yeah. Early and often. I like that. Anthony.
Yeah, I think just in a world of increasingly less in-person or at least video plus verbal communication and more written communication, I think the key solution to resolving conflict or even preventing it is over communicating or making sure that we're taking the right steps on the front end where we can speak to people, we can understand their tone, we can see their body language, we can see the sentiment to understand things. And then when conflict occurs, not shying away from it, but then embracing that with more of that direct communication, because most of that can be prevented or resolved relatively quickly with the right conversation at the right time. So my takeaway would be communicate.
I want to thank you guys. This was wonderful. All conflict will now be solved in the entire high-tech PS world. And when the awards are given at the end of the year, right, then y'all will be right there. So thank you guys so much.